Dear friends, it was some time back in an interfaith meeting. I was very much struck by this idea of sharing as a spiritual discipline, a spiritual practice, culminating in a spiritual experience. Uh, Sharing, as we all know, is taught to us as a moral, ethical discipline that we are told to practice, because sharing is very important at our personal level, at the level of family, in the society in general. We have to learn to share so that uh, the life of our own, our society, whole community gets sustained. Sharing is thus a part of our learning. Why it needs to be learned is because there is this selfish tendency in us, inborn. Nobody needs to be given training about that, to be selfish. We get born with that training. As that famous Dawkins, Richard Dawkins, a biologist, whose book says that, the title of the book is Selfish Gene. So the gene is itself selfish. Inside us, it is automatically that we have that selfishness. But that is where the training comes. Education steps in. That whatever we are and whatever we should be, there is a gap, and then education and training fills that gap, and thus we come where we ought to be. As we sang in that song, that by moving, we bring ourselves right to where we should be. It is, therefore, we are taught, give to others, just don't hold yourself. Parents teach children to, give, share with your siblings, because it is otherwise the tendency is just to keep for myself, don't give. But then that is not right. That is really hurting one's individual as well as family life, the community life, the friendships. All of that, it depends on sharing. That whatever you have is not just for your limited self, but it is, you have to learn to distribute it. And while it is understood always as a moral discipline, its significance as spiritual practice is also very important and taught by the scriptures, and we see it demonstrated in the lives of sages. This idea of sharing, share what you have, and thus that will bring you to spiritual illumination. When we keep things for just one limited self, I, and this is mine, this is the idea that is, as we saw, prevents us from sharing. And what is the result? And here I am coming to the spiritual aspect of it. That what happens here if we decide not to share? We get limited. Our awareness gets caught and bound in the idea that I am just this body. And what is the spiritual life, or what is to be called spiritual practice? Let us understand this to some extent at least, that what should be called spiritual practice. Some people take up various disciplines as matter of spiritual practice. That let me take up a theme and meditate on that every morning and evening, or let me do the mantra, or let me do some breathing exercises, or let me do some prayers at appointed times as spiritual practice. That is, why does that become a spiritual practice? Say I meditate, then, or I pray. What is how does that become a spiritual practice? I am talking to somebody. Why does that not become a spiritual practice? And when I pray, why does that particular act become a spiritual practice? What is the difference there? The difference is in my prayers, or when I meditate, I try to expand my awareness. The understanding that who am I starts becoming more and more broad, more and more clear. And gradually I start feeling if the spiritual practice is going on in the right way, in the right direction, then the prayers, the meditation, the worship, the study of scriptures, all these things, they start expanding my understanding about who am I. In Upanishads you hear these stories about how the spiritual wisdom was imparted. One story tells that a disciple came to the teacher. I don't want to go elaborate on it, we don't have much time, but when that disciple asks that what is the truth, what is that which is pervaded in the whole universe, what remains when a person dies, can you tell me? And the teacher told, well, you are that. You are that. But the disciple protested that how am I that? I am this limited personality. How do you say that I am divine? The teacher tells, well, you have to understand it. You have to see in the depth, and then you will see that. Unless we go in the depth, we do not see the hidden truths. That is why we see the scientists, they try to go deeper in the nature of the things, and then they understand many valuable ideas which superficially we do not see. So here too, although superficially this self appears to be only this body, I am this body. I say that, well, I live at 227 Angel Street, Providence, Rhode Island. I am telling only about the physical address. The body lives there, so, and that too not always. So, this is referred to as I. Our identification with body is quite strong. And so, our understanding about who am I is limited to that. But as we do the spiritual practice, this defines what spiritual practice is. As we do spiritual practice, this understanding starts getting more and more clarified and expanded. One very important truth that emerges from that is I am not caught in the body. In fact, the stunning revelation that comes is the I in every body is same. This consciousness that is working through this body, that which I call as I, is not limited to just this body. The one, that consciousness that is working or making so many all other bodies work, it is one and the same. And thus this awareness, when it comes, and to the extent it comes, makes us spiritual. Spiritual is not like seeing some ghosts and spirits. That is not becoming spiritual. Spiritual is also not drinking lot of spirits. That is not spiritual. It is the seeing that the self is same in all. That is becoming spiritual. And whatever helps us to see this truth, then that whatever helps us becomes actually the spiritual practice. And if it doesn't, whatever we do under the name of spiritual practice, if it doesn't help this, then although externally it may look like spiritual practice, actually it is not spiritual practice. One may keep on, for example, worshipping every day, and yet is not feeling the true self or not seeing the oneness of existence of this self, then that person is not doing spiritual practice. If a person is feeling it just through prayers or through poetry, through music, then that becomes spiritual practice. If somebody is feeling it through service to others, it becomes spiritual practice. Whatever helps us to bring out this inner all-pervading awareness, that is spiritual practice. Now we will be able to understand how sharing can become an important spiritual practice. In fact, it is something that can bring a spiritual practice at the doorstep of everyone. You need not be well versed in scriptures. You don't need to be meditating a lot. I don't mean that you should not study scriptures or you should not meditate. But even if somebody is not doing that yet, this practice is so potent and can be practiced by anyone to the highest spiritual benefit accruing as its result. Before learning or before getting into this idea that how it becomes spiritual practice, let us say that what makes for our bondage, what makes for this feeling or awareness that I am this body. It is an erroneous awareness, but since we, under this awareness, we keep on feeding this body, nourishing this body, we do not see that in the other body there is this same reality. We refuse to see and acknowledge that, and thus by holding on to what comes my way, calling it my own, this is mine, then that goes on to strengthen the bondage, and the spiritual awareness gets more and more covered by that. I and mine, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, is ignorance. I and mine. This is I. And then whatever is connected with this body, I start calling it mine. That is the nature of bondage. Considering I to be a limited entity like this body, and whatever is somehow connected with this body, calling it as mine. That is how our worldview gets defined, that I am this body, then this is my dad, this is my mom, this is my family, this is my so and so. It becomes, and further it goes on, getting connected in this manner. The bondage, as it were, becomes more and more concrete, more and more difficult to get rid of. And that is because we do not learn to share. Sharing is, in a way, the first step that you try to come out of this. That, okay, you are not only here, you are there also. You are in others as well. So, just as you nourish this, learn to nourish that also. Whatever you have, now you call as mine. Don't call it mine. Distribute, share. And thus, it helps us to reduce the bondage. You start feeling gradually a connection between you and others. And what is this beauty of the connection? The beauty of connection based on sharing is that you start feeling that oneness and love. That yes, we are together. And gradually, I and mine, that idea gives way to a sense of togetherness. That is the step that the idea of sharing leads us to. We are together in this universe. We support each other. Our existence depends on each other. In Bhagavad Gita, you find this idea in 3rd and 4th chapter, where it is told that, look, all the different powers in the universe, different creatures, other fellow beings, not just human beings, but even the other creatures, the different animals, they all are sharing their whatever they have with you to enrich your life. At the personal level also we see that the principle of sharing really makes us get this feeling of oneness, at least in this body. For example, see, nose shares the air that it takes in with the whole body, is it not? If the nose says, no, I am breathing, I will hold it only to me, I will not let it go to other parts of the body. It is, let them breathe and get their own air. I am not going to supply them. It is, the body will not last, and eventually the nose also will not last. I mean, it is not the other parts of the body will perish, the nose also will perish. The mouth won't say that I am taking the food. I will keep it just with me. I will not share with any other part. The body will not survive. That is how, if we keep things just to ourselves, just me, I and mine, our very existence gets threatened. If human beings as a race start feeling that all the resources of this universe are for me alone, for us alone, all animals I can kill wantonly, and I don't need to share with them, then that brings the downfall of humans as race too. It is the idea of sharing that is very beautifully exemplified in the concept of yajna. That is the first step of yajna, that hold it as a sacrifice. Whatever you have, hold it as sacrifice for the purpose of giving. Give it. When you give it, you see that you get more joy. The joy of snatching and the joy of giving. See the difference in the quality of that joy. The joy of snatching from others, an act of selfishness. Compare it with the joy of sharing, giving. And why do we get more joy by sharing, by giving? It is because the source of happiness, the self, manifests more there. And thus we feel more happiness. It is always, therefore, when we share, there is the manifestation of self. More and more manifestation of self comes as we learn this idea of sharing. And then gradually we start seeing the same self in others with whom we share. If we share within a family, with the true spirit of sharing, then everybody in the family starts being felt as part of the same self. I am in my son, I am in my daughter, I am in my siblings and so forth. One starts getting that feel that I am in all of them. Just as my body, if it is hurt, then I feel pain. So also any member in the family is hurt, I feel the pain as if I myself am getting hit. So how does it happen? Because we practice sharing. May not be consciously, but it is the idea is there that whatever comes in the household is shared by everyone, and thus the awareness gets expanded to that extent. Now if we learn to share it with others, then our awareness expands more. When we start sharing it with so many other creatures around, the awareness expands more. In Bible, at many places you read this idea as a spiritual discipline, that the main, for example, in Mark you find Mark 44, 45, that it is said there that give these things. It is Lord has given you things for giving. It is serving others that brings us closer to God. So serving others is a way to connect to others, to feel the same divinity in others. And as we do it, we see that ideal starts coming closer and closer to us. The ideal of seeing the same one divine in everyone. As Jesus mentions that, look, love thy God with all thy spirit, with all thy strength, with all thy heart. And then he says the second commandment, which is as important as this, is love thy neighbor as thyself. The idea of sharing, the neighbor has the same self as you have, the same self as you love yourself. See that the neighbor has exactly the same self, and thus the sharing will help us to see this fact more and more clearly. The Hindus are enjoined to perform every day 5 sacrifices. They are this matter of sharing. Whatever I have, I share with you all. What are these 5 entities? Very nice. One is called the celestial powers, like the sun, the wind, the rains, which nourish our life. So we acknowledge, that you are part of our existence. Thank you for sharing your wealth with us. Sunlight, sun is sharing the light with us. So we acknowledge that, yes. And thus, symbolically, we share whatever I have got, I share it with you also. Then there is the sharing with our parents and the other ancestors who may not be physically around, but we owe our being, a physical being, and all that we get to a great deal to them also, to acknowledge that we offer something in sacrifice, that say, yes, this is what I share, you are part of my life. Then to our teachers, we acknowledge that, well, through you, you are sharing your wisdom with us, and so I owe this to you, and I share that. Then there is the Pashu Yajna, means all the other animals that are with us, sharing this earth with us. They also help us to survive. Every creature, therefore, has its own important place. So we acknowledge that too. And thus it is, this life is then full of the spirit of sharing. Let me distribute. Let me not hold. Hoarding and holding on makes us more and more narrow-minded. And thus we suffer more and more because of that. The more we are hiding from our true spirit, our true nature, we are hiding from the bliss and the freedom as well. Although we crave for happiness and freedom, the acts that we do to get it are completely against what would actually make us get it. And therefore, when we share, actually we are doing what is right to reveal our true nature. And every step taken in that direction, therefore, brings more bliss and more sense of freedom to us. This is something that we all can actually experience. In all religions you will find this idea of sharing, therefore, very important. Whatever you have, share. Share with the community. If you have, for example, food, in all religious places, therefore, one important idea is distribution of food. Share it. Offer it to God, as Hindus call prasad. Prasad is that the food is offered to God, and now we are sharing it as a blessing from the God. So share it with everyone. In religious places of other these religions also, you will see this idea very predominant. Share. Jesus shared his body and blood in a very significant, very symbolically very beautiful way. At the Last Supper, he told that that bread he shared with everyone, that this is the bread, this is my flesh. Symbolically, he is sharing his body with the humanity, that I am part of everyone. So share, and also this is teaching for sharing. And the wine he touched and then gave it to everybody, that this is my blood, that take it. It need not be taken literally, but the idea is very potent, that it helps us to understand the principle of sharing and serving. The idea thus goes on to make an impact on our life. Spiritual practices are, many of them are having an effect or impact on us in a very subtle, unconscious, unobtrusive way. We won't be necessarily feeling that I am becoming more spiritual, but unconsciously that thing will happen. Like you see, the child grows, and when in the early years grows pretty fast, but every hour you don't see that the child has grown, and the height has not, every moment you don't see that, but the process is happening. After a few months you see, wow, the weight has gone up, the height has gone up. You notice that. Thus, in this practice of sharing, there won't be probably any conscious understanding that I am growing spiritually. But actually the growth will be taking place, and sometimes much more than the idea of that I am meditating. It is possible, friends, and again I am not telling do not meditate. In fact, I tell people very often, so often that sometimes they get bored, that meditate regularly. So when I am saying that meditation has some drawbacks, please understand it in proper light. That in meditating, one becomes conscious that I am doing spiritual practice, and one may get this idea, so I am superior to others. Those they do not meditate, they do not do any spiritual practice. I do spiritual practice. One, look at me, every morning I get up at 4 a.m. and then sit for 3 hours in meditation. So, you want that it should be noticed by others, and you should be given due respect for this great feat that it is. So, this really is counterproductive to spiritual unfoldment. And this danger is there in some of these spiritual practices. We should therefore meditate, but should not feel that, hey, I am superior to others because of that. But when one has this practice of sharing, it is something that everybody should be doing, and one does not feel that there is a big spiritual component to it. Yes, whatever I have, it is yours. It is yours too, it is ours. Because when you see it, or when you have this enjoyment together of the food, of other things, then you see that the joy is enhanced. You get more from that, instead of grabbing it just for yourself. So, we see this spiritual practice due to sharing is very potent, very powerful in its impact on our actual living. When we do that, we march towards expansion, that I start seeing the same self in others. And thus, this idea of I and mine starts going away. To the extent that I am sharing, that also goes away. It is not mine anyway. Who am I to share? Who am I to say that I am giving? It is not mine. It is, I am not the owner of anything in the world. This truth dawns. Why I am saying this truth dawns is that otherwise also it is actually not mine. But I labor under the delusion that it belongs to me and thus try to hold on to it. But as I start sharing, it comes to, this idea comes that no, it really was not mine at all. It is not a big thing that I am giving, it was never mine. So how am I to give? So it is being just shared. We are collectively sharing it, that's it. And so the sharing removes this idea of ownership. And thus, I do not own anything. This makes we ourselves more and more expanded in the universe, that I do not own anything. And thus God comes closer and closer to you. That the feeling of this is mine and this is mine and this is mine pushes away that which is really mine. That God who is really mine, if we look at it from that side, that what is really mine? God alone is mine. All other things are not mine. They come in my life and go away. They are not mine at all. For a time being, yes, like I stand in front of the mirror and my picture, as it were, is caught in the mirror for those 2 minutes or whatever. I move away from the mirror, I am gone from there. So, similarly, any object that I think mine is because I am reflected in that mirror for that little time. And then when it is gone, either the mirror has moved or I have moved from the mirror, it is no longer mine. So, what is actually mine then? God alone is mine. And thus, the awareness that nothing else belongs to mine helps us to see who is really mine, that God alone is mine. Thus, sharing helps us to get rid of this idea that this is mine. It helps us to expand ourselves. In these days when everything is to be, mine, I have this right over it, this is patented to me, this is, I have the copyright of this and so forth. We feel thus a lot of pain comes one's way because of somebody you feel will be stealing your ideas. As if all the ideas came to you on your own. Actually, so many things have contributed for you to get these ideas. But then, as an effect of it, you get something and you want to lay a proprietary claim on this. See, these sages, they gave such wonderful truths, the great ideas, without laying any claim that this belongs to me. Nobody else is allowed to use this, or you have to pay royalty to use this. No such thing. Because of this illumines, that awareness that I am present in all. So, you see, there is that beautiful story of King Janaka. He did not see anything as his own. And so, although he was king, he was not with that awareness that this whole kingdom belongs to me. No, everything was shared. His duty was only to administer, that's all. He was a distributor and not that it belongs to me. And so, one sage was there, Yajnavalkya. And then his disciples, they had this problem, this question that how this king gets called as a person, an illumined person. Videha means not having any awareness of body. He lives in such luxury, he is a king, and then how can he be such a person? Then the sage said, okay, come on, we can examine this. And then the story goes that these students of this sage, they were scared when a fire broke out, and they ran to save their all these little clothings that they had, and they ran to pick them up so that the fire will not burn them. But the king was not perturbed at all. And so, when he was asked that why so, the king told, look, nothing is actually mine. It is, therefore, nothing gets burned of mine. Because of your awareness that this belongs to me, you go and try to save that. But he said that my wealth is infinite. There is a pun on that word, anantam batame vittam. The word ananta means infinite. My wealth is infinite. And the other meaning of this word ananta is also the name of God. My wealth is God. And why my wealth is God? Because yasya me nasti kinchana. Because I do not say that this belongs to me and that belongs to me. Nothing belongs to me, and therefore God is my wealth. We say that this is mine and this is mine and this house is mine and this jewelry is mine and this money is mine, and thus our true wealth, God, doesn't remain as mine. We get God if we do not hold on to anything. That is how, by sharing, it helps us to distribute, get rid of this idea that it belongs to me. It dawns gradually on us that it is the distribution was what I was doing, that's all. It never belonged to me. It is all coming from God, and we are giving it. That it is that awareness comes in, and then we start actually seeing the same self in everyone. Swami Vivekananda's one very short but very interesting, very instructive also lecture is titled as Sannyasa, its ideal and practice. And there he says, what is the meaning of becoming a monk, a sannyasi? It is sharing, it is giving. You eat, you nourish your body with food. What good it is if you are not holding that for the service of others. That is being a sannyasi, that to learn, to share the body. You nourish your brain by studying scriptures. What good it is if you are not holding it for the good of the world? Sacrifice it for the good of the world. And thus that is the idea that you are a monk, means that to learn, to share, to give up this little self, sacrificing this little self. In that lecture, therefore, he says, let me tell you, as if it is, he is telling some very special thing. He said that sannyasa means love of death. And then, does it mean committing suicide? He says, far from it. What it means is death of this little ego, the little self, that this thing belongs to me and that thing belongs to me. Nothing belongs to you. You have to share. As we share, we become free from it. It is, sharing is an antidote to bondage. If I say this is mine, then that what I call as mine becomes my bondage. If I'd say that it is not mine, then it doesn't become bondage. I say this body is mine, okay, then it becomes your bondage. If I say that these family members, they are mine, this house is mine, then that becomes your bondage. If we hold it for sharing, then it ceases to be our bondage. And thus sharing becomes a very important spiritual practice that gradually brings out this essence of our true nature, the spirit, the truth, the God. It is hiding in us, as Swami Vivekananda always maintained that each soul is potentially divine. We are all potentially divine, and this divinity is to be manifested. That is the goal of life. Spiritual practice is that which makes us achieve this goal, and thus sharing, since it helps it, it is the spiritual practice. In the beginning of many scriptural learnings, the students of Vedanta recite one very beautiful Vedic chant. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. What it means is that let us be protected together, let us be nourished together, let us work together. May what we study from scriptures shine forth in our lives, and may there be no hatreds amongst us. So, what does it signify? That togetherness, the idea of sharing, that let us, the ordinary tendency is, I want to protect just myself, let others go to dogs, I don't care. But let us be protected together. That togetherness is the central idea in this particular verse, and that is emphasized at the beginning of learning, so that everything is understood and practiced in the right spirit, with the right attitude. Sharing thus is a very important spiritual practice, and let us pray that we get more and more inspiration in this matter, and let us take every opportunity where we will be able to share whatever we have till till where, up to what can it go? Till we get to see that nothing is mine. God alone owns everything. Everything belongs to God. And we become free. Thus, that is how the journey culminates. Thank you, friends.